So this is Ahmed.
How are you? Nice to meet
From
you.
Saudi Arabia.
We're here with Michael Ratner, who's a lawyer, but also primarily focusing on constitutional rights, the rights of people under the Constitution of the United States. And as you know, we have a Bill of Rights, which unfortunately is often ignored and abused in this country. And you obviously have a very strong sense of justice and social justice, and I mean that's why you're doing it. A lot of people get into law in the U.S. because they want to make money, but you've chosen a practice of law that is not a money-making practice. It's really about justice and redressing the wrongs that are done to people. And I'm just curious, how did that start for you?
Probably started with immigrant parents from Poland, Russia. So my parents were immigrants, you know, and
were they Jewish immigrants?
They were Jewish immigrants from Europe,
and so they were used to pogroms and
quite used to it. So there was always that idea of being a minority. And then the schools I went to, I think I was the only child of an immigrant parent who spoke with a very heavy accent, and so there was some of that. But then, certainly after the war in 1945 to 50, and I was probably 3 or 4 years old, I remember going to resettle refugees. Was a big part of what my father and mother did as their helpful thing, and give affidavits to get people out of Europe and things like that. And then the other thing obviously that was key was I went to college and then to law school at the time of the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement, and the time when really the move for changing the social structure of this country was at its height, and it actually succeeded in a certain level. I mean, when I went to law school, there were 10 women, and now Columbia Law School is 50% women. There were 9 people of color, and now it's 20%.
فلما كان في جامعة كولومبيا في فقط يعني 10% من النساء والآن 50%.
And so we really changed that period, and you know, I got beaten over the head by cops then.
يعني ضربوا الشرطة بهذه التغييرات.
So it was really a period that my son is very envious of me. He says, you know, Daddy, you had all these things you were able to do in the late 60s and 70s, and what kind of world are you leaving me now, you know? And I think that's a serious problem, I mean, to be honest.
It is sad, you know, that we've lost that spirit of really the struggle.
No,
in
we
essence.
have.
I mean, in Islam, you know, we actually call it jihad, which is the struggle, and it's a very abused term now. But that real meaning is that it's a struggle for the establishment of social justice, and
that's one of the things I really learned about Islam that I didn't know before. I mean, who knew from anything really before 9/11 in this country? No one knew we had 4 million Muslims living here, or whatever the number is. But when I talked to some of my clients or their families, really, who were even in Guantanamo.
So how many Muslim clients do you have? Well, I'm sorry, what did you learn about Islam?
Well, what was interesting is that, you know, like young people in this country go to their home countries, whether it's Israel to do work in a kibbutz or something, that a lot of these young men had nothing to do, obviously, with the Taliban or terrorism or anything. They went actually as a sort of spiritual and struggle reawakening to get in touch with their Muslim roots. And the idea that the idea of getting anywhere in America, convincing people that, oh, if they were anywhere near Afghanistan or Pakistan, they were obviously terrorists. It's just hard to do, but it really makes sense, but people aren't willing to translate the experience of, let's say, Jewish people going every year on, you know, 10,000 of them to Israel, and you see the story of one of my clients is named Mohsen Beg. Mohsen Beg is a young man from the UK, United Kingdom, and his father is here actually. His father's leaving today, unfortunately, Azmet Beg, and he's been in Guantanamo for 2.5 years.
2.5 years.
And when you hear his father tell the story of what happened, he was arrested in Pakistan eventually, in his house with a young child and his wife there, and his father gives this beautiful thing about his son was more Muslim, and not more Muslim, but obeyed the tenets of the religion than he did. He prayed. His father never prayed. And he said when he was a young man, his father had put him in the real estate business for a little while in England, but he wanted to go and do some social good in Afghanistan in this case. And he got there and he had trouble getting anything to do with the Taliban government or anything, so he went off and he decided to put little water plants, little water pumps in different poor villages in Afghanistan, because he felt Afghanistan was almost the poorest country in the world, and the people loved him for it. And then, of course, when the bomb started, he just fled to Pakistan, and eventually the U.S.
got arrested and
picked him
taken
up.
to Guantanamo. He's a British citizen.
Right, and nothing I mean, we can't move an inch on the guy. They've never told him what he's charged with. But here's a man who, you know, people would in this country moon, he's Muslim, he was in Afghanistan, throw the key
wrong
away.
place, wrong time.
But in fact, as his father said, he had long discussions with him about what he called creating society, and wanted a society where old people could do something good and young people, and he was going to set up schools, and he understood his wife was going to teach the women's side, and he was going to teach the men's side. Right, and that's a story that is true, I think, but that's selling that story in America about, and that's who a lot of those people are in Guantanamo.
Well, I mean, that's the whole point of having the right, you know, habeas corpus, to actually, you know, to see what you're being charged with, have representation. It's all to prevent these abuses. I mean, that's why we created this system, or those before us
That's
created
why,
it, because there were so many abuses of government. And how many Muslim people are you representing right now?
Probably our office. What happened is that we started out with a very small core of people. We took the first case, which at that point was January 2002, and we were out there on a limb. I mean, this was, I was actually at the World Trade Center when it happened. I was jogging near it. And people were here obviously devastated for months. And
yeah, it was shock. People were shocked.
And still are. And the whole southern part of Manhattan was like a funeral. I mean, you know, so we were, at that point, people weren't ready to do much defense of anybody, although right after 9/11 there were a huge number of Muslim non-citizens detained. And we started, because we have a woman here who speaks Arabic, and she went immediately into the prisons, and we started to work with people who were detained right away. But even that was not popular at that time in this country.
So you were doing something, I mean, right away.
Right.
You just felt that it was important that...
Within a week, because we were getting calls from husbands, or from wives, from children saying, where's my father, where's my husband? And our government was just, the Bush administration was just circling around telling them, oh, he's been picked up, he's in the prison in New York, but in fact he was in the prison in Passaic, New Jersey. So they were giving people the runaround, and they were treating these people who were nothing but the lowest level immigration violators, like, you know, the guy had overstayed his visa for 30 days, or before he went back to Pakistan he was working in a gas station for 2 weeks, and these are the people who were picked up because either their girlfriend was mad at them, or their landlord, or, you know, they just got stopped arbitrarily because they looked Muslim or Arabic. And these were the people who were put in, and they were treated as terrorists. They were shackled, you know, hands, feet, legs, had the heck beaten out of them in a lot of cases.
Seriously?
Oh, yeah, yeah. In fact, we actually filed a lawsuit.
And a lot of that's anger, obviously. It
was anger over 9/11. The guard said, oh, Muslim, I'm going to push your head against the wall.
Yeah, and it's part of our problem.
And that's what happened in the prisons.
Yeah.
And we filed a lawsuit, and then about maybe a year later, the Inspector General, who's like an overseer of looking at what happens, came out with a report confirming everything that happened. They were treated as terrorists, and they shouldn't have been.
So you saw this coming in essence.
Right. We saw that coming. And then in November of 2001, President Bush issues what's called Military Order Number 1. And that was, I remember having a reaction in this room with my office. We were stunned. Here, all of a sudden, it's 2 months after 9/11, and he's essentially taking over the country from a military standpoint.
We've been jointly working on Guantanamo issues for 2.5 years. Abu Ghraib, there were photographs, and that was what woke the rest of the world up. Right. It took that. In Guantanamo...
Did you read this whole thing?
Yes.
Can I ask you, I mean, what was your feeling about it in reading it?
I know them all. They're truthful, decent, principled, interesting young men who've been to hell and back. They've experienced a world that we can not even imagine. And despite coming back traumatized, they sat down for 2 months and tried to set down for the rest of the world
what happened,
what their experience had been, which is horrifying. Because there were no photographs, they worked with an illustrator to show what otherwise no one would believe. I'm sure if there'd not been photographs from Abu Ghraib, no one would believe that what the detainees experienced had happened. That's forcible shaving of hair and beard for non-cooperation in interrogation in Guantanamo. That's if you were reluctant to cooperate with your interrogators. It's the necessity for the world to see, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
To believe. That's short shackling, where the detainees
They can't move.
trapped like that hour after hour after hour, with the air conditioning turned up to freezing as a preliminary to interrogation, and sometimes day after day for a week at a time. That's medical treatment. That's detainees told they were to have an injection. When they asked what it was, they were not told. They objected and forcibly detained and pinned down. Grotesque practices. That's the testimony of three who've emerged, but there are hundreds, more than 500 still there.
You know, what's compelled you to do this?
Well, it's our privilege, wouldn't you say, to have been in a position as lawyers where we think we are a tool that can do something. The whole of the law has been skewed. All of our rights, so-called, in England and America have been distorted to make sure that these young men can't win.
Yeah.
The whole of the context in which the detainees are fighting for their rights is one in which they're never meant to win, and therefore it isn't really a legal issue at all. It's a political issue. But if lawyers can in any way make use of the law that exists to try to achieve a balance, then that's their job to do it.
If you had one thing you wanted to say to the Muslim world, the Arab world, what would that be right now?
I have had the experience for about 7 years in England of representing and coming to know well people and their families who are Muslims and who are devout Muslims and who have been branded as Islamic fundamentalists, as if that was an appropriate term of abuse, which it indeed is offensive. And I've come to know people as tolerant, intelligent, funny, perceptive, broad-minded, and that has been a life experience that I value above any other. But that's a rare privilege, and for many of the population of England and America, that is not a relationship or a privilege they're going to have.
Right.
And there has to be a way of bringing home to the West what an atrocious pattern of behaviour it is involved in,
Right.
what a collision course of monstrous proportions that it has somehow implemented without any understanding or ability to see where it's going.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Well,